Welcome to a football show, Thursday edition. Nick Suss of the Tennessean, Braden Gall, brought to you by Sinkers Beverages and Shotgun Willie's Barbecue. If you have any needs for that large, massive championship Sunday that's coming up, in which case you are going to watch a football game with lots of other people, you're going to need beverages and meats. Sinkers Beverages for all your bevy needs, and Shotgun Willie's Barbecue for your ribs and your wings and your brisket and your sausage and everything else you need for a great party. Make sure you check out both Sinkers Beverages and Shotgun Willie's Barbecue for all of your NFL championship needs. Nick, we have a new Titans general manager. We will discuss who he is, what he does, what he's like, what do we learn about what strategy he's going to deploy, what's the actual, who has final say, Nick. We'll put that godforsaken conversation to bed. Honestly, the major question here, I think this is smart. I think you wrote about it today, Tennessean.com, which is, are the Tennessee Titans better? Are they a better football team through all of the changes and through all of the palace intrigue and all the fun stuff we've discussed over the last month? Are they a better football team? The draft strategy, of course, for Borgonzi and for Chad Brinker, we'll get into that. And then one final SEC question for you with the Ohio State Buckeyes National Championship. On paper, they're pretty good. I've read on Twitter. You can get to Nick, of course, at Nick Suss. You can get to me at Braden Gall across all platforms. Also in the streets, IRL, if you care about that as well. All right, so first and foremost, your impressions of speaking with Mike Borgonzi. I thought he was a very polished, sort of professional, kind of down the middle guy at the press conference. You could hear the Boston College in his accent, but ultimately he seemed like just sort of a kind of a basic front office general manager, and I mean that in a complimentary way. Yeah. Just a football guy. We'll get into all of his different decisions. But what did you learn about the Titans' new general manager, Mike Borgonzi, in both the conversation that you had off camera, I should say, it wasn't off the record, with Chad Brinker, and then, of course, during the press conference with Borgonzi on Wednesday?
The first impression immediately was, holy crap, they hired Mayor Quimby. But then the accent toned down a little bit. I think he was just excited at first. That made me very happy. But, man, we go back to the day Rand was let go, and that quote that everybody kind of pounced on of Brinker saying, we want a football guy, a guy who breathes football, who lives football 24/7, all that stuff. Borgonzi seems to be that guy. He seems to be what's the John Michael Higgins' character in Arrested Development, the lawyer who is just a very serious lawyer, who's just like, I am a lawyer, and that's because I'm a lawyer. Like, Borgonzi feels like the general manager equivalent of that, of not going to be much frivolity, I would imagine. He's going to, as I think Brinker was the one who said it during the press conference, they're going to not see the light of day in the month of February. They're going to watch 4 games of tape on every single prospect. Like, this seems like the style that the Rand Carthon era was. I don't think the word relationships was brought up one time in 90 minutes worth of media yesterday. This is a scouts organization. They are going to use the Green Bay scouting system to find players who are big, fast, strong, physical, and violent, which, again, is what what every single NFL team does want. Nobody's ever like, I want the scrawny ones. But, like,
I want the slow, weak, dumb ones.
But they do seem to believe that their model to acquiring and evaluating talent is going to be the one that works. So if they're right, the Titans will get big, fast, strong football players. If they're not right, the Titans won't. Like, it's purely like, if they're as good as they say they are, the Titans are going to get better.
Let's not go printing the Borgonzi scheme T-shirts yet. Like, let's not invest in the Borgonzi scheme
Right.
just yet. We don't need to go ahead and do that. I do think that hey, let's see some results, because to your point, this is a results-oriented business. That's all it is. It's not about relationships. It's about results. He is all ball. I mean, that was the quote you're talking about, where Brinker's like, we want to be all ball all the time, and he does come off as all ball, but he also comes off as sort of like just a regular guy who just wants to.
Yeah.
Like, I can be a little bit more. I think this front office, Brinker and Borgonzi, will be a little bit more transparent than the previous one, and I don't know how transparent people believe John Robinson to have been. He was very open with his conversation. I don't know if he was 100% honest all the time. I mean, nobody can be, but he does strike me as all ball kind of all the time, and just sort of I think you get what you see, and I think that's ultimately a bit of a shift from from Carthon, but it ultimately we have no idea if that leads to success or not. And I am curious. I want you to just when you say they're going to have the Green Bay scouting system, what does that mean to you?
I want to understand it better. Like, I am not super versed in what it does, but I think it's a simplification from what I've come to understand of the scouting process, of the scouting terminology, to sit down and say, we are going to grade players according to this one scheme, and everybody in the scouting department is going to speak our language, and we're all going to agree that these are the things we're looking for. And that does feel like a slight backpedal from the years of the coaches are going to tell us what to look for. So I don't know if that's necessarily the case. Again, I want to understand this more. But if they are talking about, I think the example Brinker used yesterday in the sit down was, if I call a player a 59, then Mike's going to know exactly what that means, and everybody in the scouting department's going to know exactly what that means. And there are some people in the Titan scouting department who know how to speak that language. There are some who do not, but they are going to unify the language to seemingly simplify. If everybody is grading players on the exact same scale, then they will be rowing the boat in one direction. Now, the Titans almost certainly had a grading scale that was standard under previous eras. They're probably just switching to a new one. It's not to say that everybody was turning it in. It's like, this scout uses 1 to 10, this scout uses A to F, and this scout just uses stars. Like, they probably were unified, but now they are unified under the ideology of the way the Packers and Chiefs and Seahawks and the teams that use this system evaluate talent.
It's just like one scout's just like, this is 6 eggplants. This guy's only 3 eggplants. Like that guy's 9 eggplants. Somebody else is like, this is 3 jalapeno. It's 3 spices. Yes. He's a 3 spicy strong safety. That's what I'm looking for.
Yeah, they graded on the capsaicin scale. That was exactly what was wrong.
I only want 5 eggplant defensive edge players. That's all I want. Is this akin to the way you understand it and are describing it? Is it akin to sort of when a new offensive coordinator takes over a system and it's like, look, we're all running the dig, we're all running the bench, we're all running the out, but we're going to call it something different? Or is it actually streamlining a process? Like, does it actually change when they sit down and look at a player and they see, one scouting department sees, size and body control on a receiver, and the other scouting department sees size and body control on a receiver? They're just calling it something different? Or is there actual differences? Because I think the one thing you said that's interesting to me is, if we're all going to be grading a player against a scheme, that puts a lot of pressure on Brian Callahan's scheme to be the right one for the organization long term. I think with LaFleur, it's pretty obvious that his scheme is okay. It's going to be all right. Is that the only major difference here? Is that they're not grading players on being great at football? They're grading them based on how they fit into the system?
Maybe. I would say that there are certain hallmarks of what the people who learned under Ron Wolf believe. And we can talk about the size of defensive backs and the speed of receivers, of like, this is what you draft. And you've watched the Packers a long time. You can tell people specifically what types of players they've drafted, from Mike Holmgren through Mike Sherman, through Mike McCarthy, through Matt LaFleur. But like,
it's hard to really describe it in a succinct way. I might say like football IQ over elite athleticism. Yeah, I might say.
And that's probably Brinker said something along the lines of, he's impressed by the tweaks that Borgonzi has made to the scale. So like, this is probably nitty gritty stuff. And if you guys don't care, let us know in the comments. But like, I believe that is what we're going to see, is some offshoot hybrid of the types of players that the Packers favored, your bigger DBs and your route running focused receivers and your big offensive linemen who come from the Midwest and look like it, and that sort of thing.
Lots of corn in the diet.
Yeah. I think you're going to see some holy hybrid of that with what the Chiefs have become, with their emphasis on speed on the perimeter and with their emphasis on building through the defensive backfield and the interior defensive line. And like, there are certain things that both of these teams very obviously like to do, that I think it will be interesting to see how the Titans kind of merge those thought processes.
It's interesting. I would say the Chiefs have evolved to become a far more physical front without an emphasis on explosiveness and speed.
Right.
I mean, they got a bunch of honestly, they got a bunch of like Big Ten, Missouri, and Big Ten pass rushers and linebackers that don't necessarily run. They're not twitchy 4-4
Yeah.
guys. I mean, Bolton's really good. Karlaftis, like they got the kid out of Wisconsin, the linebacker. They got Tranquil. Like these are not guys that were probably like 4-4 combine guys. And I would say the Packers' offense is very much based on versatility.
Mm-hmm.
It's very much based on, and I know this is Titans fans might not want to hear this, but the positionless football of the offense is really what makes Shanahan, McVay, LaFleur, Washington now, all those systems that sort of come off that tree. A lot of those systems are based on sort of versatility, positionless football, the ability for everybody to do a lot of different things on offense. And in Green Bay in particular, there's no one top dog on offense above everybody else. Josh Jacobs, maybe, I guess, this year, and maybe Aaron Jones. But I think that's sort of like, if just observing those two teams from afar, how have they evolved over time? The Packers went from an elite number one guy that they focused on all the time to sort of a versatile, spread out, positionless offense. And the Chiefs went from finesse offense to big, powerful, strong defensive front over time. And so I don't know if that's what we're going to see. Those sound like good ideas.
Yeah.
And so we'll see what happens.
Yeah, we'll get into this more deeply a little bit later in the show, but I think that the big change isn't the type of player so much as it is the process that will go into when they take the players they take. And I think that's going to end up being the main difference, is these words like discipline, like patience, like admitting that one of the hardest things to do when you were with the Chiefs was sit Patrick Mahomes on the bench for a year.
Yeah.
And like, look at how talented he is. That was a 10-6 football team. The year Patrick Mahomes was benched, they went to the playoffs. And if they were a quarterback away, you're theoretically looking at a team that was 12-4, winning the AFC and could have gone to the Super Bowl. But they waited because they knew that long-term development was more than the short-term adrenaline shot.
And I'm not sure they've missed an AFC Championship game since.
They have not.
Which is freaking absurd. It's just absurd.
Yeah.
All right. So a couple more questions here before we get into those exact questions, which is the team better? Who has final say? Which we're going to put the final say question to bed, I think, today on the show. I am curious, though, quickly, Brinker, I think he will be more transparent or more available or more, sort of out front with the fans and with the media. I think Borgonzi certainly has some of those skills, but Brinker is clearly better in sort of these fireside chat type of environments. He reached out to a bunch of reporters after the Carthon thing, sort of individually, and he didn't want to have cameras on his particular interaction yesterday. Any takeaways from that in terms of what that means as far as coverage of Brinker, getting information from him? And then, of course, Amy Adams-Strunk not being available. I'd like to know what the readout is on her not being there. Versus, look, everybody was there on the football side. Callahan was there. Everybody was there. Burke, Nihil, they're all there. So I'm curious your thoughts on Brinker doing it this way. I think there's sort of you could argue it both ways, right?
Yeah.
I think you get more intimate questions and answers when you do it the way you guys had him on Wednesday. I was not able to get there. And then the ownership. Let's start with Brinker first.
Everybody's selfish, right? So like, other than this hour a week where we have fun together, I don't care about video and audio recording. I just need the digital quotes for print. So it was perfect for me because I feel like the answers were better geared to write them down. So I enjoyed it. I think that if Brinker is going to be the kind of person who wants to sit down and have an in-depth conversation that maybe isn't geared toward the soundbite, that is good, like cool. You shouldn't want your president of football operations to be out chasing a soundbite. Now, would it be great to be accountable? Yes. And I do think there is a degree of accountability that you miss when you're not speaking directly to all of the fans. But that is also, in theory, what the media is for. We should be telling people what the people in power are saying. So I hope we did our jobs well enough yesterday, and you guys have fewer questions now than you did 24 hours ago. And if we didn't, let us know and we'll ask better questions next time. But I don't. I
think you guys got most of the answers. I just found that even just sitting with Callahan before the season started, in those moments where he was off camera, it's just the temperature is just brought down. To a point where you can get better answers. So if you're a fan and you're willing to say, look, I trust you, Nick, and the rest of the press corps to sort of translate this well for us. Are you willing to give up video for maybe a little bit more nuance and a little bit more articulation? I think that's the trade-off you're making as a fan, and I think as a media member, obviously it puts more value on being there in person, which I also would think is good for the media and just for our jobs, because we do things that matter. And so I think that's important. But otherwise, I think it's actually, you could go 6 of one, 6 of the other. Like, is Brinker going to be perfect on a dais in front of like the White House press crew? But probably not. It's not his strength. But can he give quality, articulate answers that allow you to then paint a good picture for the fans? I think that's fair. Quickly, Eddie says, how awkward was it in person when Stillman went 0 for 2 on the exact same thing? Because it was awkward as hell in video. I didn't think it was. I just thought it was Stillman digging in to try to get an answer. We're going to answer that question for him in just a second. I didn't think it was that awkward.
I have a really high threshold for cringe. I did not feel any cringe.
I didn't either. I'm the same way. It's got to reach a real weird place for me to cringe. Every now and then it happens on TV. Ed says, Braden, do you have final say and do you wield a heavy hand? Look, I am the 4th most important living creature in my house, and that just barely puts me ahead of the dog. Okay, so to suggest that I have final say on anything in my life, and that I'm even allowed to have hands, if my children and wife allow me to have hands today, then that's a great day for me. So
what happens on the days where they don't allow you to have hands?
It's tricky, man. Making lunches every morning for the kids, it's hard. Can't get the dog out for a walk. Real hard. It's hard to do with those little light, tiny T-Rex hands. It's just like just up here. No Amy Adams Strunk. To me, the question is, what's the readout? I think we know her track record on this. She's not an out front owner. That is what it is. We've debated and complained about the positives and negatives of that for a long time. I'd like to know if there's anything more to read on her not even being there when they do hire a new general manager, even if the title is, a little bit wonky, and we'll get to that in a second. Is it a readout that she is sticking to her word, that she is stepping back from football decisions and wants to allow the football thing to run on its own? Is that the right readout? Or is the readout, hey, I only show up when things are great. I don't want to be around for this. I'm scared to answer questions. What's the right read for this?
I don't know. I try not to care about things that didn't happen. And it's optically better when you are the owner of a football team and you are around constantly, through good, through bad. If you are always there, you project strength, you project consistency, all that stuff. But and I mean this as a compliment, she doesn't seem to care that she has bad PR.
No, she does.
Because somebody who would care about having bad PR would take the steps to do something about it, and she hasn't. And that's, again, good for her. She believes what she believes, and she is living that way.
You've seen the revenue an NFL franchise throws off, right?
Yeah. Who cares? But
read the bank account statement. That'll get rid of your feelings about PR real fast.
So would it have looked good if she was there? Sure. Would we have been able to take a photo with 5 people holding a 25 Titans jersey instead of 4? Yeah.
By the way, not touching either. I thought, am I the only one who picked up on the body language in that photo? I thought it was weird. And maybe that's right. Like, no one had an arm around somebody else. Like, literally, they all had their hands at their sides. I don't know.
That is the proof that there's no collaboration.
No collaboration. Relationships do not matter. It looked very awkward to me, but I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong.
No handshakes longer than 2 seconds.
It's not a bad rule.
I don't know. I don't seem to think it's a gigantic deal that she wasn't there. But had she have been there, it probably would have been good. If you are angry that she wasn't there, why? What would she have brought to the occasion other than, oh, she's there?
I think it's maybe more sort of the last page of a very interesting end of the season chapter.
Sure.
And I think sort of the fact that you've not really been, the only time we've really seen you for the most entirety of the entire season was the win on the road against Houston. And you were very front and center on that one. And so I think that's ultimately what it is you're just there's been a pretty tumultuous month. The team is changing again. It's in flux, and it seems to be a lot of it's sort of it's your team. let's ask a couple questions and see how you feel about this stuff. Where are you at on
Yeah. Oh, I agree there.
the perception of your franchise in the hierarchy of football, or, like I just think there's ways to, even if you're getting answers that aren't necessarily like super articulate, nuanced, transparent answers, like at least you're stepping to the podium,
Sure.
taking the medicine and giving your fans a little bit of insight. A lot of owners do that. So that's all.
Yeah.
I don't think a ton changes either. I don't think a ton changes either, but I want to know, like, I don't think it tells me, oh, she's actually hands off. I think it tells me more of, she just doesn't care about PR and, doesn't really have the time that she feels is important to answer questions. So,
yeah. If she introduced Chad, who introduced Mike,
right,
it would have just been an extra 3.5 minutes I had to record the audio for.
You need more space on the phone. That's all it is. Donnie says, I'm closer to on time today. There you go. I do appreciate it. Ironically, after I gave Donnie a hard time for the shows always being on Monday and Thursday, we of course did a show on Tuesday. So I apologize. I apologize to you, Donnie, for Monday's show being on Tuesday. All right. So ultimately the question, Sinkers Beverages and Shotgun Willie's Barbecue for all of your Sunday needs, hypothetically, during a big football game where there's lots of people gathering to watch. If you want smoked wings, the best wings in town and the best brisket in town, and racks of ribs, that's what I want for a Super Bowl party. I said Super Bowl. Oh my God, I'm going to be sued. Trademark infringement.
The big game.
Yeah, whatever. I would go to Shotgun Willie's Barbecue. I would just say, look, give them a call or stop in sometime before the game, obviously, and just say, look, I'd like to order. I'd like to, this is what my order is. He'll take care of you. You pick it up on Sunday. He'll cook it all Sunday morning, and then you'll be good to go to cater your meal with the best meats in town. And of course, they're right down the street from Sinkers Beverages. So make sure you swing by Sinkers Beverages, pick up all the stuff you'll need to make fancy cocktails or have beverages and beer or wine and champagne. You name it, they've got you covered. So make sure you swing by Sinkers Beverages and Shotgun Willie's Barbecue for all your Super Sunday needs. So are the Titans better is going to be the main question. But before we get to that, I do want to sort of put to bed the final say thing, because it does feel like we've got a clear answer. And the clear answer is that it might not ever be super clear, but that we kind of understand it as they have explained it to us. And that, it's a little wonky. It might not be perfect, but it kind of is what it is. And it's not super hard to follow. My first question to you is, do you think people, like, is it important? Because I am, of course it's important on who decides what on a football team, whether it's the coach, whether it's evaluating players, whether it's the draft or the free agent strategy. Like, of course it's important. I do think it's blown out of proportion in this particular market, in part because of how the Titans have handled it. But also, like, every football team has a bunch of really smart people working at the top to make decisions. Andy Reid and Brett Veach might have been the final say in Kansas City, but don't tell me they didn't lean on Mike Borgonzi for stuff or other people in the organization. So I do think a lot too much is made of it. But I had some friends that were reaching out to me just being like, is this a Nashville problem? Is this a Titans problem? Is it a fans problem? Is this something that exists across all NFL teams? Like, why are we so obsessed with final say? So my first question is, how important is it to figure out exactly who has final say?
I kind of am leaning on a metaphor that my colleague Gentry Estes wrote in his column yesterday, which is, imagine you live in a city that enacts a controversial law. Let's just name the law. You're not allowed to wear green t-shirts.
Pretty controversial.
And then the cops all come out and say, look, you know us. We're not going to enforce that law.
So it's like going to a rock concert it's like going to a music concert at Bridgestone Arena. Everyone's smoking cheap, but like the cops aren't going to do anything about it.
Yeah. So if that's the situation you're in,
right,
you ask the question, well, why'd you make the law then? Like, the whole thing right here is just the question of, well, if you say final say doesn't matter as much as we think it does, and if you say, I'm not going to exercise this authority because that's not who I am, then why not just give the authority to the other guy? And again, full credit to Gentry. Go read his column at the Tennessean. He kind of spells out this argument much more strongly than I ever could. But like, if you are asking, what is the importance of final say? Two options. It matters. It doesn't matter. So if we're saying it doesn't matter who has final say, who cares? Just give it to anybody. Give it to Callahan, give it to Amy, give it to whoever you want. It doesn't matter. because we're all going to work together to figure it out.
This is the problem with the Titans situation, is that they haven't done either of those two things.
Yes. But if we are going to sit here and say that final say fundamentally matters, then you and I can explain what the chain of command is, which will be Amy Adams-Strunk is at the top. She has two people who report to her. She has Chad Brinker. She has Burke Nihill. Burke Nihill oversees the business operations. Chad Brinker oversees the football operations. You can divide football operations into two trees from here. One side is operations side, which will be video department and security and equipment and all of the things that, to use the example he used, help decide what color the chairs in the new stadium are going to be. The other side is the personnel department, which decides things like who you draft, who you scout, sports performance, sports medicine, et cetera, et cetera. Borgonzi will oversee all of the sports personnel side. Brinker will oversee everything else. Now, Brinker also oversees Borgonzi. So Brinker technically does oversee the football personnel department, but Borgonzi is his head deputy in that department, and he will be the one who is tasked with setting the agenda. So if you're asking, well, what will the strategy be? What kind of players will they be looking for? If we go back to the conversations we were having at the beginning of this call about, are they going to look for this type of defensive back or this type of defensive lineman, that will be Borgonzi's purview. Borgonzi will oversee the coaching staff and the scouting department. So Callahan will report to Borgonzi, who reports to Brinker, who reports to Amy Adams-Strunk. Now, who is the one actually making the decisions? They say it will be Borgonzi. Borgonzi will be the one making the draft picks. Borgonzi will be the one signing the free agents. Now, what does final say mean in this situation? That would essentially mean Brinker has the opportunity to veto. He has the ability to be the safeguard, be the parachute in case the organization is making a bad decision. I do not get the read that this means he's a tyrant, but that power can certainly be applied tyrannically. Yeah, so if you are a cynical person who believes that Brinker just wants to be in charge, then yes, Brinker's in charge.
I think you did a great job of explaining it. Ed Henry says, I think it's more of a problem if an organization, if final say is invoked a lot, kind of says they don't have a consensus and are on the same page. In theory, I agree with that, but I also think about the number of times inside of business offices where I just was like, I really don't think this is the right decision that the bosses were going to implement, but you just got to go execute it. And, a lot of time that happens way more than you think. So I don't know if it's as big of a problem, but I understand Ed's point, which I don't think which is not a bad one. D Good says, I just want competent choices. I think that's ultimately, that's totally fair. Here's the deal. Chad Brinker hired Mike Borgonzi. Mike Borgonzi reports to Chad Brinker. Chad Brinker has the ability to break ties. Yes. Ultimately, all of this, in my opinion, is on him. I do have a question about what else is he evaluated on? Like if you're deciding 100% of his job productivity or, how good a job you did this year, I am curious what outside of the football team, man, those chairs in the stadium, they really look good with the fresh morning light coming in from the east. What else is he evaluated on? Oh, the grass, the Bermuda is really growing well in the practice facility.
So
no break-ins from the security team. I don't know what else is he evaluated on.
Yeah, we can parse through whether we think this is valid process or not. But I asked Brinker pretty directly, why is this the better structure? Why not just have a general manager? And his answer was, a lot of the times when a GM is hired, it is because a franchise is broken. A team is losing, a team is not very talented. And you get hired to be a GM because the thing you have proven you're good at is evaluating talent. And then you take over a GM job, and 70 to 80% of your job is not about evaluating talent. And so you have been hired to do something you're good at, and then you do a bunch of stuff you're not good at, and you're so distracted that 3 years later you get fired, and the team's broken, and you hire another guy who's evaluating talent well, and it creates this vicious cycle.
Because you are great at calling plays does not mean you are good at running a program.
Yes. And so this is theoretically the philosophy of Brinker is running the program while Borgonzi is developing a roster. Now, the two very obvious caveats. One, this is the structure they said they were running last year.
Right.
And two, there is clearly no proof yet that Borgonzi can do it, because being a general manager is just kind of like we talked about last week. Oh yeah, I can't prove that I know how to build a bridge until you let me build a bridge. So
and it either holds or it falls down.
Yeah. And so we all come back to this idea of, if they are as good as they say they are, the Titans are pointing in a right direction. But we won't know until we see these next 3 months and much, much beyond that.
Yeah, and I think, ultimately, I think, and I was going to pull it up verbatim to make sure I could get this verbatim here, because I think Kaharski explained it relatively well when it comes to this. Let me see if I can find it here, where he basically just says, people may disagree with the setup, but it's time to put the conversation to rest. Borgonzi is running the draft meetings and free agent strategy, and Brinker hired him to do so. Brinker is his boss. He has the power to break ties, but has no intention of being some sort of overlord. That's it. If we're looking for someone to blame or praise, well, Brinker is the one allowing or preventing things from happening, but Borgonzi will be setting everything in motion. It's not as needy and tidy as we want, but that's it.
Yeah.
That's 4 sentences that explain it all. It's a little bit of both. Ultimately, Chad Brinker is sort of the larger head on the platter, but Borgonzi is right next to him, and it's on both of them. Ultimately, through their conversations, preaching patience, and with this new power structure, I do think that a lot of this is the Titans' fault. I think over the last 3 years, we had, John Robinson is fired, and you hire Rand Carthon, and we don't exactly know who's who. It's all about collaboration. We're not exactly who's making decisions. That's partly the Titans' fault for putting that out there. Then, of course, they fire Vrabel, so we think Carthon, and then they say Carthon has final say, and then they hire Brinker, and then the next year they change it again. And so it is, a lot of this is on them. A lot of this is on the Titans kind of playing with these titles and these roles and these, even when they said the thing, we could tell that the thing wasn't necessarily the thing that they said. So it was, some of this is on the Titans, and I understand fans being tired of it and being done with it and saying, look, it's on all of them. Brian Callahan's guilty or innocent if they win or lose. So is Borgonzi, so is Brinker. They're running the football team. They all take the blame. And it doesn't mean that one guy's not more to blame for success or failure than the other. There's a chance. But, that takes context and reporting to know that.
Yeah, it's like, what did we call it last week? Fantasyland? You want to take a trip to Fantasyland real quick?
Yeah, let's do it.
To plug something I wrote earlier in the week, if you guys want to go to the Tennessean, I, as a thought experiment, went through and redrafted the 2 NFL drafts that Rand Carthon led for the Tennessee Titans, using the model that I think Chad Brinker's Titans will believe in. The draft and develop, the draft around core positions.
Trade down.
I didn't have any trade downs because that would be way harder to do retroactively.
But it's Fantasyland.
I know, but it's also easy mode Fantasyland.
Fair enough.
And so what I ended up doing with the Titans of, you don't make the Will Levis trade, so you get back 1 extra pick out of that. And I think I ended up with the Titans picking Zay Flowers in the first round instead of Peter Skoronski. You grab, what was his name? You grab Keon White in the second round instead of Will Levis. And then you end up with Wanya Morris in the third round instead of Tajay Spears. So you've gone and drafted wide receiver, defensive end, offensive tackle to try and fix it that way. And then down ballot, you keep going with
injured Ryan Tannehill's coming back.
Yeah, of just like that first year, and then let's say you have the same record, whatever. You're picking 7th again the next year.
Sure.
This time you pick Bo Nix. This time you pick JJ McCarthy. Of you take your pick on a quarterback then when the roster is a little bit stronger.
Michael Penix.
Whichever one you like. Whoever was available at 7. There were 3 of them available at 7.
Bo Nix is the pick, but
I agree. But then second round, I had him taking somebody like Jackson Powers Johnson. Third round, that's when you go ahead and take a running back. You get Bucky Irving. That's where you kind of or I think that was a 4th round pick. But nevertheless,
hindsight's so perfect.
Hindsight's fun,
so perfect in Fantasyland. I love hindsight inside of Fantasyland. It's great.
But the reason I'm bringing this up is to kind of answer the "Are the Titans better off?" question. Of if you look at the way that things could have or would have been done, if you apply the philosophies that the Titans are preaching today to 2023 and 2024, and you ask yourself, hey, if they did those things those 2 years and they did them well, would the Titans be better off than the old model? Which over the last 2 years, I would say the Titans drafted adequately to above averagely. Like the Titans didn't draft super poorly. Skoronski's turning into a pretty good guard. Tajay Spears is valuable for a spell back. He's not a starter, but he's valuable for a spell back.
I really like Tajay Spears, but a 3rd-round pick on this team for a backup running back ain't the end. That's not a good pick. So.
And then you have Latham and you have Sweat and you have Brownlee and you have guys who look like they can be players. I don't think they drafted poorly.
Right.
But if you go out and swap those picks for players at premium positions, for players who are draft and develop types, for guys who you think can be cornerstone players on a roster that you are trying to build, instead of a roster that you are trying to just like piece people out and say, keep it going, keep it going, keep it going. Because that was essentially the flaw of the 2023 Titans, was you had one foot out the door with Levis, but the other foot was in the door saying, we have to try and compete right now. Go get a guard, go get a running back, go get a tight end. Take these positions that are going to help the top of the roster without strengthening the bottom of the roster.
Yeah.
And then just slide Tannehill out for Levis when he's ready and we'll keep things going, reload without a rebuild. That didn't work. That seemingly never works.
So one of the things I said, I was on the air on 102.5 when Mike Mularkey was sort of unceremoniously pushed out for Mike Vrabel. And I was working with Derek Mason at the time, and my big spiel on the move was that we know Mike Mularkey's lack of upside. He's a fine guy, and he's a decent coach, but the goal here is to take one step back, to take 2 and 3 steps forward. Mm-hmm. Derek Mason he didn't agree with me at the time, but he came back to me a couple years later and he was like, dude, you were totally right about that. And that's what they did, is they took one step back with risk involved from a team that went to a playoff game to make the change to go to Mike Vrabel because they thought the upside was higher and the opportunity was one they had to take with Mike Vrabel. That was the correct decision. It didn't, and I think they went 9-7, 9-7, but they didn't make the playoffs. And so technically a step back. And then, of course, we know what happened the next 3 years where they were, they go to the AFC Championship game, then they're the number 1 seed and, all this stuff. That's what this feels like if you're talking about, are the Titans a better franchise today and more equipped to win than they were a month and a half ago? I think it is a step back to clear up some of their previous mistakes. I think you are a more stable and more, I don't want to say professional because that's not the right word. That comes off as a knock on Rand, but I just think you're in a better structured position to move forward and succeed. Also, you have the number 1 pick, a ton of cap space, et cetera, et cetera. I just think that I want to get into their process here, but I do believe that is where this organization is at. I think they are a better football team today than they were a month and a half ago, but I don't know how fast and how much that's going to translate. Now, here's the one thing I couldn't get out of my head about listening to all the conversations the last 2 days. They're preaching patience, different than what Rand Carthon said and what Brian Callahan said. We're a 3-win football. Borgonzi, we're a 3-win football team that has a lot of work to do. We don't have the quarterback figured out. We don't a lot of stuff that they mentioned. We need to rebuild. Chad Brinker, we need 3 years of draft picks, 30 draft picks over 3 years, 12 in the top 100. We don't have that. They're going a little heavier into we are what we are in this stage, which I think is smart and acknowledges the Titans fans' feelings and tone right now. To me, this screams Callahan has 2 years. And I always thought that we went into this season thinking, hey, he's going to have to make progress. And by week 7 or 8 or 9 or 10, if they haven't made progress and it's pretty obvious that he's still not capable of doing the job or it's too big for him or whatever, that they're going to make a move. But it feels like this is now a 2-year window for Brinker and for Callahan because the two of them are still tied to this past 3-win football team. We can put it all on Rand, but Brian and Chad own some of that 3-win football team as well. So to me, again, I'm all for the clean slate, but if you're doing the clean slate, then you need to give them more than half a season. You got to give them at least 2 seasons.
I don't know if that's how it reads, but that's how it should read, is what I'll say to agree with you. I still think that the Titans could be setting up a fall guy situation if they're piss poor again this year. But I think
being Callahan.
Sure. But I think that's more related to if they trade back than it is if they use the number 1 pick. If the Titans use the number 1 pick, and let's say they draft a quarterback, it makes much, much more sense to marry that quarterback to a system and not try and screw with his development than it does to let him work with a guy for 1 year if you are planning on firing him the next year. If the Titans do not draft a franchise quarterback this year, if they go with a bridge, or if they try and develop a Sam Darnold type, Zach Wilson, Trey Lance, you can go back and watch last week's show to hear all these options. If they go with one of those options, and then you're sitting next year with 2 first-round picks, and you have the ability to go get Drew Aller or Garrett Nussmeier or Arch Manning, whoever you prefer at the top of the draft, yeah, it makes sense to say bring in a new coach to work with the new quarterback. Now, all of that is so far in the future conjecture.
Well,
but just strategically, that's what I feel.
And the other thing is, Brian Callahan is not going to be the same coach at the end of 2 years of being a head coach for the first time than he would be at the beginning. And so there's also, and this is, I think, what people have a tough time with understanding about the evaluation of Rand Carthon, but it's not hard to understand in our own lives. If you are in an office every day with people around you, you may think very highly of someone at the beginning of your relationship in the office. And by the end of the 2 years working with someone, you're going to learn where they're good at stuff and where they're bad at stuff. You're going to learn if they're carrying their weight, if they're not. You're going to learn if you're better than them at this or they're better than you at this. You learn about this stuff, and it's not stuff that gets reported. You don't write long articles about, like, Brian Callahan's inability to motivate during team meetings. Like, you're not going to, that's not what's going to happen. You kind of hear it on background, or you hear anecdotes about this or that or the other thing, good and bad, about everybody. And I think what Chad and Mike, one of the biggest jobs here for Borgonzi and for Chad Brinker is to evaluate Brian Callahan based on what they know about him in private, not just like we can all evaluate him on results. We can all evaluate him on yards per play and points per game and red zone offense, and everybody can do that. They have all of this other stuff that they're going to have to figure out if he's the right guy for the job. I think it's interesting that you said if you don't draft the quarterback, but you have all the ammunition, that's when you make the change. I actually think if that's your argument, then both are then both are on the table. Like, he could be moved at the end of next season either way they go this year.
Yeah.
I actually think it's more likely that if you build the roster, depth, trade down, add pieces, which frankly is what they're telling us. Mike Borgonzi said over and over again, I want to trade down. Like, I want to trade down. Chad Brinker is saying specifically, they have 23 picks over 3 years with 8 top 100 picks. In his mind, that's not enough. They need 30 picks over 3 years and 12 top 100 picks. The only way you do that is trading out of the first pick. They are screaming and telegraphing, in my opinion, which is the right decision, to trade out of the first pick, at least in their private little media sessions with Nashville reporters. Hopefully that doesn't make its way to all the other GMs in the NFL. But I actually think if they build the roster, I mean, I guess maybe you're right. Maybe
again, it all comes down to quarterbacks.
It all comes down to quarterbacks. If they're resetting the quarterback in 2 years in the draft, I think it's more tied to we need time to evaluate Callahan on our own. And also, there's not a good quarterback in this draft class. Like, I think you put those two things together and you go, next year's the year to do it.
Yeah.
If we're going to change, okay, I can be on board with that. All right, I just meandered my way through my own opinion, which is
hooray.
Which is the point of a podcast, honestly. We're not hot take radio. This isn't scream about something until the other person agrees with you. That's what this is. All right, so quick point here. Shotgun Willie's Barbecue and Sinkers Beverages for your championship Sunday needs. Some positions, and this is, I think Brinker said this, I believe, some positions you can kind of have, like, you can get by with, like, the tough, gritty, smart, physical guy. And some positions you need sort of explosiveness and speed and just pure talent. To me, that's not a shot at any previous regime, but to me, that is a shot at the Titans' inability to invest and develop pass rushers and wide receivers.
Correct.
I think those are two positions you need explosiveness and speed. Middle linebacker, safety, right tackle, those are positions I think you can get by with really good, smart, physical, tough football players. Is that your readout of that comment?
Yes, but I will come in by saying I've had that bias of believing that for like 23 years. Since I have been cognizant and understanding football, I've been like, the fast guys need to be fast and the big guys need to be big.
Well, but there's something to be said about you look at the Fred Warners and the Nick Boltons and
Sure.
an elite superstar missile of a middle linebacker can change an entire defense. So.
Sure, but I'm coming from the perspective of a guy who every draft season, and I will leave the person I pick this year's name until after the draft. I won't spoil it. But every draft season, I pick one guy to irrationally hate. Of just like everybody loves them, and I'm like, no, you're wrong. And I remember a few years back, it was Isaiah Simmons. Of like everybody was talking about like, oh, this positionless defensive player that can do everything from the middle linebacker spot and can play everywhere and can line up this and that and that. I was like, no,
a safety the size of a defensive end.
I was like, who cares? That's that. Why would you want that? That's a bad sales pitch. I would not want that. And so like, if you were to like build an ideal roster, the guys who I would say it matters the most to have the physical tools are your running back, your wide receivers, your left tackle, your defensive ends, and maybe your defensive tackles. These days.
Corner
is an interesting one because I think it's just an impossible position to play.
I mean,
I will get absolutely flamed for saying this, and I will continue to say it. I think it is harder to be a great cornerback than it is to be a great quarterback. Like just the numbers bear out.
I think it's athletically. Athletically,
like, it's legally. Like it's just the rules are stacked against you.
No, I mean, yeah, no, I mean, look, I do agree that like the most difficult physical thing to do is to try to play man coverage in space one-on-one against these elite Hall of Fame style receivers. Yeah. That the game is producing now at like copious rates. Like the elite receivers are being produced. There's a factory now that's just churning these guys out, which is nuts.
I would say there are probably 1 out of 10 teams has a good quarterback, and 1 out of 10 teams has a great cornerback. But every team plays 3 or 4 cornerbacks at a time.
That's fair.
Like it's just really hard to do it.
Who was the name you hated in the last few drafts? Like, give me the name that you rationally hated.
I will have to go back and remember.
You don't remember for last year?
I don't think.
Dang, you must not have hated him that much.
I don't know. I don't know if I hated anybody that strongly. I probably did.
Is it Colston Loveland this year? I want to know.
That'd be a fun one. I don't think so. Let me just pull up the big board.
Let me see here. Jack Sawyer. Do you irrationally hate Jack Sawyer because he's getting headlines for being Quinn Ewers' roommate and getting a strip sack in the semifinal?
I like Jack Sawyer fine.
Okay. I'm just having fun here with this one.
Yeah, I'm looking through. I'm trying to figure out who I hate right now.
Oh, you haven't settled yet. Okay. I'm looking at my big board over here.
I could take a fun position and be an Ashton
Siobhan
Genty hater.
No, that's dumb. That's a dumb thing to do. He's like number 4 on my big board right now. He's not going to go there, but whoever, and Paul said this very well on Monday, whoever drafts him is going to be very happy with him. That's it.
Can I come out with a real hot take that I'm building on?
Go for it.
I personally believe that Travion Henderson will be to Jahmyr Gibbs what Ashton Genty is to B. John Robinson. They're both going to be really, really good NFL players. But Travion Henderson is going to end up on a better team and used in a way that makes him look like a superstar.
Okay.
Genty's going to go first. Genty's going to be.
I'm trying to. Yeah, the difference is they both were like top 12 picks. Henderson's going to be like a third rounder. So
I think he sneaks into the first round.
I mean, he's an elite weapon. I'll just pop in the tape.
I think he sneaks into the late first round. I really do think one of those teams falls in love with him.
Right now, he and Judkins are both behind Caleb Johnson, the running back out of Iowa, as well as Omarion Hampton, the kid out of North Carolina. Both those guys are kind of unanimously graded in the top 50. If you told me I could have Travion Henderson in the 3rd round or Hampton or Johnson in the 2nd, I'm taking Henderson in the 3rd. So I agree with the value and the evaluation of Travion Henderson. That guy's 3rd step is full speed.
He is.
I like full speed. I like full speed by step 2 or 3. I like that.
Yeah.
All right, I'm gonna look at this board. I'm gonna try to figure out who you like. Is it Shamar Stewart, the defensive end for Texas A&M? Because he's only getting drafted because he's 6'7" and 300 pounds.
There are so many Shamars. I think there are 3 Shamars at the Senior Bowl this year. I got to figure out which ones are which.
All 3 of them went to Texas A&M.
I got to figure out which one's which before I decide to hate one of them.
Shamar Turner is the true the true defensive tackle, whereas Shamar Stewart is like the 6'6", 290-pound sort of old school 3-4 defensive end, hand in the dirt kind of tech is what I think. If I had to go back and you're right. There is Shamar Turner's listed at 6'4", 290. Also, is it potentially like a kick out edge? I think he's more like Danico Autry. And
Darius Robinson type.
Yeah, and I think Stewart is more of a kind of a hybrid all along the defensive end. So I guess both those guys, maybe they are the same person. Who knows? So here's the other thing. With the draft and their messaging around trading down and about they want to attack the quarterback position relentlessly and they're going to turn over every stone. And he mentioned, draft, quarterbacks on the roster, free agency, trades. He mentioned everything. And the picks. Are they not telegraphing the trade down in your mind as well? Like that, I didn't really get a chance to ask you about that.
They are, but this time of year, you always have to wonder, is this a double twist? Like, I don't know.
We will not pass up. We will not pass up on a generational talent. Who in this draft is that outside of Travis Hunter?
I don't know. Generational talent is such a silly term. It's like elite quarterback. It can only be applied retroactively.
Like, is Malachi Starks a generational talent? Like, he might be the best safety prospect in 5 years. Does that make him a generational talent? Maybe.
And how big is a generation?
And does position of need not factor into generational talent? Because Starks is not going to get drafted in the top 5. Like, he's not that good.
This is a digression, but like when people talk about generational, like I feel like at this point there are a lot of people who would say, "Oh yeah, that generation of quarterbacks with Peyton and Brady and Aaron Rodgers and Drew Brees."
Yeah,
it's like Aaron Rodgers was drafted 10 years after Peyton Manning. Are they in the same generation now? Aaron Rodgers won 2 MVPs while Patrick Mahomes was in the league. Like, what's the generation?
Oh, no, hang on. Brady was drafted, 99? Rodgers was 05? That's only 5-6 years, right?
Yeah, but that's my point. It's like, what is a generation? If Malachi Starks is the best safety prospect since, who was the last one picked in the top 5? Jamal Adams. Is that long enough to be Xavier a generation? McKinney? Like, I don't know.
I think quarterback's like a 15-year window. You kind of know it when you know it. Like, you get in, and honestly, to your point about elite only being applied retroactively, what happens is you get a couple of guys who come into the league around the same time, and that's when the generation starts. Yeah. You're just like, oh, Breeze was drafted. When was Breeze drafted? Like 90.
Oh, wow.
Okay. So you have Manning, Brady, Breeze, like basically in like a 4-year window. And you add and Elway retires, right? Yeah. Montana retires, and
in that same era, you had McNabb drafted, and you
had and then
Warner emerged.
Rodgers comes along, and at the end of that generation, and that's sort of that's your window, and now you have the Mahomes, Josh Allen generation, which is a different generation, right?
Yeah, and then Russell Wilson was just in the middle, like, hi guys.
Yeah. Also
I'm my own thing,
being short and annoying the whole time. Look, to me, I don't know who else would be generational talent in this draft. I'm looking at this going, but by the way, like Brock Bowers comes to mind as someone who I think is a generational talent at his position. I just think he was coming into the draft. I thought the talk about how, you can't draft a tight end. It's like, no, you draft this tight end that high. Yeah. And I think it's turned out he's been that way. We'll see how his body holds up long term. Do I think Tyler Warren could be that? I don't think he's nearly as explosive as Brock Bowers. He's not a guy you throw the ball to that much, but I do think he's going to be a 12-year starter in the NFL at tight end.
Yeah.
And probably an all-pro a couple of times. So is he a guy that's, again, I think you can look at Genty, Starks, and Warren, and you can say at their position, they are clearly the best and probably going to be great for a long period of time. Are any of those 3 things that the Titans need right now? Probably not. But if you trade down to 12 and you're choosing between Starks and Warren, and Genty, obviously Genty's not on the board for them as much, but don't tell me they couldn't use a 12-year starter at tight end or safety. That would make the team better. It would. So
I guess I am just a victim of having like a ridiculously high threshold for what generational should mean. Jamar Chase, that was a generational talent. You knew it from the second he was being scouted. But
is it safe to say that there's like not many in each draft class? Like, you're saying there's a couple in each draft class.
I'm saying that the average draft class will have less than 1.
Less than 1. All right, let me pull it up. Hang on. I mean, Bryce Young, Trayvon Walker, Trevor Lawrence proves your point. But I think if you go back and look, all right, so let's just go Bryce Young. You got C.J. Stroud, Will Anderson were 2 and 3. Okay. Paris Johnson's been very good. Is Bijan Robinson a generational talent?
No, I would say at running back, the last prospect who we rightfully could have called generational was Zeke. No, Saquon. Saquon was the last one.
Saquon, yeah. Jack Campbell's played all 34 games as a middle linebacker at 18. I don't think that's generational talent. I'm trying to look here. I mean, Jackson Smith and Jigba, Zay Flowers, all guys, Jordan Addison, all good players. None of those are generational talents.
No, last receiver probably would have been Jamar. I guess you could have argued for Marvin last year, but I still would have said Jamar.
I mean, Darnell Wright, Paris Johnson are good players. Jahmyr Gibbs is a great player. But is Will Anderson and CJ Stroud, are they? I mean, I honestly, coming out of college, I would have said Will Anderson was a generational player.
Coming out of college, I would have said Will Anderson. I would have described him the way you just described Tyler Warren. He is going to be a very good player for a very long time. Yeah. But if you're talking about a generational talent at edge rusher, I'm looking at Myles Garrett. Like, you have to be, you have to be Von Miller. You have to be like.
Kalijah Cansey has 11 and a half sacks. Will McDonald has 14 sacks. Jalen Carter has 11 sacks, and Will Anderson has 18 sacks, all taken in the top 20 in that draft class. Just want to point that out. And
Jalen Carter would have been the one in that class that I could have argued for.
Okay, and then Brian Brise was 12 sacks for New Orleans down there in the top. He was a 5-star recruit coming out of high school, so there's a really good pass rushing class.
Correct.
In that, and Nolan Smith was taken 30th in that draft class. Obviously not a pass rusher, but very good. There's some good passer. If only.
Who was the best guard drafted in the first round?
The best guard? Paris Johnson's a tackle, right? Darnell Wright's a tackle. Skoronski was drafted that year. So
that's
Broderick.
That's the setup.
Oh, gotcha. Okay, my bad. I was actually looking at this because is Anton Harrison also a first-round pick, and Broderick Jones also a first-round pick as well.
Both tackles, yeah.
Both tackles, yeah. So, okay. Look, I think there's a lot. Here's the thing. I've been looking at the board a lot, and I think there's a lot of really good receivers and edge players that you can get by trading down in the first round. So if you want to stay in that top 12, you can get – I love Emeka Egbuka. I'm just going to tell you he's a player I'm going to stand for the Packers, for the Titans, for whoever. I think he's going to be a really good football player. I think there's 4 or 5 good edge players, also probably all going in the top 12. I think you can get one of them if you want to trade back. There's really good edge players at the top of the second round, and there's a lot of good offensive linemen, either guard or tackle or swing guys that are also going to be available at the top of the second round. Fewer receivers than in the past. I think Trey Harris is a really good target in the second round if you're looking at receivers. But I think you can go edge or receiver in the top 15. If you trade back, you add yourself extra picks, you can then go edge, receiver, offensive line with your next few picks in the second and third round. So if you're trying to get top 100 picks and 30 picks in 3 years, you got to move out of that top spot.
Yeah.
So
Titans fans, get ready to learn that it is pronounced Uman Mielen.
Princely's in my first round. I think he's in the first round.
If he's there at the top of the second, Uman Mielen.
Uman Mielen.
Yeah, learn pronouncing that one. I think you're going to say Sawyer is a lot easier to say. Tuiomalau, is that how you say it?
You just say JTT.
JTT.
Just say JTT.
There's a lot of names you're going to have to learn how to say because
Savanaia from Arizona, Jonah Savanaia, he's going to be available, offensive lineman. How about, can you say the kid out of Minnesota, Ursari's first name?
I don't think I can. I have not heard it out loud yet.
I like a good Cam Williams, it's nice. But you look at Tyler Booker, Cam Williams, Ursary out of Minnesota, Membu, the kid out of Missouri, Donovan Jackson out of Ohio State. Those are all guys that could be available at the top of the second round. So there's a really good, if you really do need to prioritize right tackle in the draft, which I don't think they need to do. If they need to do that, there's a lot of good options at guard and tackle at the top of the second round. There's some good edge rushers all through the first 50 picks. I think the receiver, if you really want the receiver, I think you need one of the top 3. I think if you really want one. So I think you trade down, stay in the top 10, and then you take either Burden, Tet McMillan, or Emeka Egbuka.
Who's the fourth? Trey Harris?
I think I have Trey Harris like in the back end of the first round. I think Trey Harris is really good. If you're looking at the rest of the names, there the kid out of Stanford, Ayo Manor, is really. I think he's going to be one of those guys that nobody watched in college, but ends up being a really good player in the NFL. But other than that, it's Evan Stewart, Isaiah Bond, Jalen Royals. That's the Golden Kid is getting a lot of love out of Texas, moving up draft boards right now as well. Savion Williams is a big body guy out of TCU. There's a pretty stiff drop off. I like Higgins and Noel out of Iowa State, but those are later picks. There's a lot of good group of 5 receivers. Whether it's White out of UNLV or Nash out of San Jose State or Horton out of Colorado State, but those are all like mid-round guys. So I think you need to target the top 3. And if you get one of the top 3 in the top 12, then you're good to go. If you want to get Harris at the top of the second round, you're good to go. Otherwise, I'm waiting until the end and adding 2 or 3 guys the way Green Bay has always done this. I mean, Dontavian Wicks and Romeo Doubs and Christian Watson and Jordy Nelson and Devontae Adams, like none of those guys were picked in the first round. Jaden Reed, like you go down the list, all these guys are picked later in the draft. Let's find the skills that work for your offense and put them in there. So, all right, anything else? Z Dean says, what do you think about Kyron Lacy? The hit and run stuff won't help his draft stock. I think the issue with Kyron Lacy is I think the hit and run is evidence of his maturity level, is what I would say. I think there's a lot more there with Kyron Lacy, very talented player, not always focused on doing everything exactly the way he's supposed to. Yeah. So
I think this is much different than the T'Vondre Sweat situation.
Yeah, very much so.
I think it's delicate, and I don't want to speak out of turn if I don't know all the details, but that's going to be a tough sell.
Is it fair to say, to your point, I would agree with you that it's different. Sometimes a good person makes a bad decision and makes a mistake. Other times there's a track record of behavior. Is that fair?
Sure. Yeah.
Without speculating inappropriately and unethically. So there you go. Trevor Lawrence was considered generational talent. Term gets thrown out way too often. Richard seems to agree with you, Nick, on that. He was a generational talent for most of his career.
Because again, let's talk about the difference between generational prospect and generational NFL player. Like
That's
Trevor
true.
Lawrence was a generational prospect in the same way that like Tony Mandrich was considered a generational prospect. I'm sorry to bring that up.
Sorry.
But just because
we've won Super Bowls and the Lions got Barry Sanders, so it's fine.
Just because generational prospect doesn't necessarily equal generational talent, that does not mean that Trevor Lawrence wasn't at the time a generational prospect.
And passing on Trevor Lawrence is still dumb. It would have been dumb.
Yes.
You don't pass on Trevor Lawrence. This is a guy who won a national championship as a true freshman, making throws over Alabama's defense in a championship game that freshmen don't make. So
an Alabama team that could have the claim to being the best team in the last 10 years to not win a national championship.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. ZD, would it be crazy to think Trevor Lawrence could be traded with everything going on in Duval? That is look, you Titans fans who are upset with the chaos and the dysfunction and all the radio hosts in town that have been, leaning on that crutch for a while. Love all you guys. You're not even the most dysfunctional team in the division.
Truly the Harry and Lloyd of football, the Tennessee Titans and Jacksonville Jaguars.
Linked inextricably together forever. When they're both good, they play 3 times for a trip to the Super Bowl. And when they're both bad, well, here we are. So otherwise, pay for good journalism at the Tennessean. You can check out all Nick Suss's stuff there. You can get to me, of course, in the streets, IRL, and at Shotgun Willie's Barbecue for your best brisket in the city, at Sinkers Beverages. Order your meats for the big game coming up from Shotgun Willie's and get those bevies from Sinkers Beverages. And if this weekend you need a drink because you're watching bad playoff football or there's no football on and you're upset on Saturday, search Uber Eats. Don't drink and drive. Search Uber Eats and have that booze delivered directly to your house. Sinkers Beverages. Nick, anything else? Parting shots?
Yeah. Subscribe to Tennessean. College football was fun. Yeah.
We'll talk about college football maybe at another time.
Yeah.
We'll be down in Mobile, or I'll be down in Mobile next week.
There.
So you'll be there. So Nick and I have got a show coming up for you, and we've got a lot of other stuff to do when we get down to Mobile. So lots of good Senior Bowl coverage with the number 1 pick in the draft and a new front office organizational structure that's still hard to explain. For Nick, I am Braden. Thanks for hanging out. Thanks for listening. We'll talk to you guys next time. Peace and love.